In 1952, Everett Swanson, was that when you were born, Margot? In 1952, the year of Margot's birth, Everett Swanson went to South Korea. He was going there to preach to the troops. And while he was there, he just arrived. He's from Chicago, and he's walking through the streets, and he's got his coat in his hand, his winter coat in his hand. It's winter there when he goes. And this little kid runs by and snatches his coat and keeps on running, and Everett's like, it's cold, you can't have my coat. So he starts chasing this little kid through the streets. And they turn the corner, and he sees this like little shanty town when he turns the corner, and there's his coat laying on a pile of rags. And so he figures the kid has dropped the coat, and you can come in, Viv. He figures the kid has dropped his coat and just ran on. He goes to lift up his coat and sees that there's a child laying underneath it. And it's really cold. This child doesn't have like clothes. Like this child was using this coat to keep warm. And then he looks around, there's all these other piles of rags. And he realizes that each pile of rags is a child, buried under a pile of rags, trying to keep warm. And his heart was broken for these little kids, these little starving babies who are freezing to death. And so he goes to the local restaurant and he buys a whole bunch of soup. Did they have styrofoam back in 1952? I don't know how he got the soup to them. So he brings soup and he bought blankets, and he brings these little kids soup and blankets and feeds them and gives them blankets. So the next day he comes back to check on the little kids, and he sees a truck with soldiers. And every morning what they would do is the soldiers would come through this little shanty town, and they would shake the little piles of rags, and anything that didn't move, they would throw that child had died overnight, and they would throw the child in the truck and cart them away. And Everett was like, how is this possible? What is happening that it's just normal, the everyday thing is to pick up the dead children? And so he realized that these little children were alone because of the war. Their parents had died in the war, and they were all orphans of the war. And so he came home, he preached, he did his tour with the troops, and then he came home to Chicago, and he was talking to a friend of his. And he was telling him the story. He's like, I just can't believe there are all these children who only have each other. These little babies who only have each other. They're sleeping together in piles of rags because it's the only way they know to survive. He's like, I can't just sit here and go about my day knowing that all these little kids are starving and freezing to death. And so the friend gets out his checkbook, writes him a $1,000 check, and says, here, the Lord told me at one point in time that whenever I hear about the need of orphans and widows that I'm supposed to give, take this and do something about it. And so Everett, within the years, started what we now know to be Compassion International. It had a different name at the time, but he chose the name Compassion International because of this verse in Scripture, Matthew 9:36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. These little kids were harassed, orphaned, helpless. They were sheep without a shepherd. A shepherd takes care of their sheep. A shepherd makes sure they have what they need, and these little kids had nobody. And so he started Compassion International, and Compassion International today is one of the world's largest aid organizations for children. And it's a pretty cool system. You sponsor a child. So what he does is he matches children up with sponsors. And so he goes into a city that has a lot of children who are in need, and he finds a church in that space. And he says, all right, we're going to work with you, church, because he believes that the church is the center, should be the center of a community. He believes that the church should be the place where Jesus is working out of. And so he partners with the church, and he gets them on board, and the church offers programming, and the church makes sure that these little kids have clean water to drink, food to eat, shelter, they even fight for safety. If the kids are living in an unsafe neighborhood, they do what they can to make the neighborhood safe. They make sure they have education, that they have their school supplies. They have mentorship. The kids come to the church every week for at least 8 hours a week. 8 hours a week, that's a lot. When you really think about it, that's at least 2 days after school, right? So these little kids, however often, 8 hours a week, come and they learn about Jesus, and they learn about hygiene. They make sure that they are keeping up on their schoolwork. Like they give them tutoring, and they support them, and they're praying for these little kids, and these kids have big brothers and big sister kind of a situation. right? They give us letters. Like those of us who sponsor somebody, I have two, and I write them letters and they write me letters. So Everett's understood that it should be a relationship. It's not just here's some money for you guys. It should be a relationship. Like I've been sponsoring Lorena now for, I don't even know, 5 or 6 years now. And she and I write letters back and forth, and she draws me drawings, and I send her Christmas gifts and stuff. Like it's really this really sweet thing that we have this connection. And I remember, like, I look back and sometimes I'm a jerk. I don't want to tell you guys. Sometimes I'm a jerk. I was at Crossroads and they're having a big compassion event, right? Crossroads is huge. They seat 1,500 people at a service if it's packed. Like that place is giant. And so I'm there and they're having a big Compassion International weekend, and they're showing the pictures of the little kids and they're telling the stories and everyone's like, oh. And so at the end they're like, and if you'd like to sponsor, you can get up right now and go to the back of the room and pick a little kid off the wall. And everyone gets up and moves, and I'm like, oh, I have to go sponsor a kid. And so I got up and I pulled little Lorena's picture off the wall and I sponsor her. But the more I get to understand what compassion does, the more I'm glad that I got roped into sponsoring, because studies are showing that kids who go through the compassion program are more likely to break out of poverty. They're more likely to have a more successful adult life because they've been fed, they've been educated, they've learned about hygiene. Like all those fundamental things that they need when they're little have been provided for them. And so they're more likely to be successful as adults. And I'm like, okay, so for 13 years, I can sponsor Lorena, and then for the next however many years of her life, she has a better chance of survival and doing well. Like, yes, sign me up for that. So then a couple years ago, I was walking and I was thinking about Lorena and praying for her, and God's like, yeah, you should sponsor another child. And again, I had a jerk moment, like, all right, Lord, that's another $38 a month. But God is so good to me in my finances and so now I sponsor Juan and Lorena. I picked 2 kids from Nicaragua so that if ever I get to go visit one, I can go visit the other. You can even go visit your kids. Like Compassion has a thing where you can go visit them, and like that could be pretty cool to go and actually meet them. And now that I'm learning Spanish, by the time I get to go, I'll be able to speak to them. So I think Compassion is a really amazing organization. And I'm in this mission. My class I just finished up in seminary this last week was missions, the mission of the church. And it's all about, like, look, there's all this crap going on in the world. And as a church, it is our responsibility to do what we can to alleviate that. You know? And so Compassion International is this organization named after the word compassion. And so I was like, yeah, I understand, like in our mission statement, we say that we want people to feel the grace acceptance of love through our compassion. So it's like, it's one of those words, compassion, like, I think I know what it means, but I'm not like 100% positive. You know, I have the gist of it. I don't know that I could define it to somebody. And so in Merriam-Webster, it says it's a sympathetic consciousness of another's distress together with a desire to alleviate it. So it's not just saying it and going, oh man, that stinks. Let me go get my latte. It's seeing it and going, oh man, that stinks. I want to help them. I want to do something about that. How many times have you been in a situation where you see someone in distress and you want to help them? You see someone who forgets their wallet at a restaurant, and you're like, no, I'll just pay for it. You see someone carrying, struggling something heavy, you're like, here, let me help you carry that. You see someone who doesn't have food, and so you want to take them food. You know someone has passed away, and so you set up, or someone has a cancer diagnosis, and so you set up a meal train for them because you see that they're in distress, and your natural response is, I want to help. I want to do something to help you fix that. That's what compassion means, and that's what we are called to be as Christians. So and then, of course, I always ask myself, what does the Bible say about compassion? How is it used in the Bible? And in the Old Testament, compassion is almost always paired with grace and forgiveness. It's talking about God's compassion to us as grace and forgiveness. But when Jesus comes on the scene, Jesus uses the words like this. He says, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and he healed their sick. So he's just gotten off the boat and he sees all these sick and hurting people. And he doesn't come and be like, hey guys, I know this stinks right now, but hey, someday you're going to get to go to heaven. It's going to be all right. No, he healed them. He saw their distress and he fixed it. He had the power to just lay hands on them and pray for them, and they were healed. And then the next one is, Jesus had compassion on them, and he touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight, and they followed him. He sees people who, and this is, obviously he's talking about a blind person, but this can also be figurative. People who are lost without the Lord, and he touches them, and he says, now I want you to see. I want you to see the truth so that you'll follow me, so that you'll come into the love of my relationship. And then the next one, I have compassion for these people. They've been here for 3 days and they have nothing to eat. He saw that they were hungry. And he didn't just say, well, it's fine because they're hearing really great stuff. They can eat later. He's like, no, they're hungry. Let's get them some food. And this is when he did the whole multiplying loaves and fish thing, right? Is there one more? There's one more. And then finally, Paul says in Ephesians, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ's God forgave you. So here's this is a kind of a homage to the Old Testament. Compassion is, there's a brokenness in our relationship, and I don't want that to happen anymore. And so I'm going to forgive you so that this brokenness is gone in our relationship. And so I love all of these things. Like when I see something, I should let my heart be broken for that. It's really easy for us in Midwest America, and most of us live in sort of a middle-class-ish environment. It's really easy for us to have like the blinders on and only see what's in front of us, and to surround ourselves only with what is fine and working. You know, like it's easy for us to not watch the news. Like I don't watch the news. And through my taking this class, I realize that when I see the hurt and the pain going on in the world, I'm just like, oh, I'm sure someone else, like, that's too much for me. I got enough going on. Oh man, or I think, oh my gosh, if I start caring about that, Pandora's box is going to open, and I'm going to care about everything, and it's going to crush me. But, you know, it doesn't have to be a wide open door. You know, like I have a friend, she went to India because in India, their little families don't have enough money, so they sell their daughters into sex slavery. They sell their daughters to brothels. So here are 8-year-olds doing 10 acts that you do in a brothel a day because their family didn't have enough money, and that's the way they unload one mouth to feed, and they usually get paid to do it. Like that breaks my heart. So my friend, that broke her heart. So she went to India for a year or two. Now we don't all have the ability to go to India for a year or two, but that's happening here. Kids are still being sold into slavery here in America. I know that seems crazy, but I have friends who are passionate about trying to end that and raise awareness for that. So maybe your passion is raising awareness for something that stinks. Maybe there's something happening in America that shouldn't be happening in America, and we say, not on my watch. I'm going to do what I can to stop it. I'm going to do what I can to raise awareness that this is happening. So I have another friend who realized that it's happening here in America, and so she's very passionate about trying to stop slavery, especially sex trafficking in America. Because I want to believe that doesn't happen here. I want to turn my eye and be like, nope, that doesn't happen here. That happened like a long time ago. That only happens way over there. Also in my class I learned that like there's a lot of people starving in this world, and I just figured there wasn't enough food. But there is. There is enough food made in the world to feed everybody in the world. I did not realize that. The problem isn't that there's not enough food. The problem is the distribution of the food. So here I am with the freezer full of stuff that's rotting and going bad, and there are kids somewhere else who don't have enough. And I'm not like how many of your parents said when you were a kid, you need to eat everything on your plate because there are kids starving in Ethiopia, right? Like I remember hearing that when I was a kid. I was like, fine, I don't like this food. Send it to those kids. That was my 8-year-old response. Then give them these vegetables I don't want to eat because I don't want them. But we can help either financially, raising awareness. So like you could sponsor a kid through Compassion International. They've got, and especially with the pandemic, a lot of their sponsorships, as people lost their jobs through the pandemic, a lot of people had to stop sponsoring kids. So you could sponsor someone through Compassion International. You could get involved with an organization like International Justice Mission. There are people who are still being sold in slavery around the world, who are being held in captivity and forced to work. Or they're forced to work and they get like $1 a day, but they're charged $2 a day in rent. So they're stuck in the system. There are organizations out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are organizations out there. So whatever it is that you are passionate about, get involved. Find a way to help other people. Our job as Christians, Jared was asking me today, he's like, okay, I feel like there's some responsibility in being a Christian. I said, right now your responsibility is to get to know the Lord. And as we do that, the more and more we get to know the Lord, the more he pours his love through us. We're like a funnel that we capture his love and pour it out on everyone else. How can I look at a child who's laying in a pile of rags, freezing to death, and keep on walking? How can I know that there's a child starving in Nicaragua and I could just skip eating out once a month so that child could eat every day of the month? We need to allow the Lord to break our hearts for what breaks his. We need to allow the Lord to take the blinders off when I want to walk. This is like in me in Target, that little dollar section, right? Like I walk by like this, like don't go. You'll spend $20 on a bunch of crap you don't need, right? But I think we do that when we see hurt and pain. We're like, oh, I can't do it. I'm busy today. I've got other things on my mind. And we put our little blinders on and we keep walking. But God, if you allow him, will remove the blinders in certain situations so he can use you and your gifts and your passions and make you passionate about something that you can be a person who helps sees the pain of others and alleviates it. So my question and challenge to you is, are you allowing the blinders to come off where the Lord is asking you to remove the blinders? Or do you just stay safely ensconced in your little world where everything is fine? Are you allowing God to break your heart for what breaks his? And if you do get your heart broken, do you do something about it? Or do you, like I have done, and I confess I have done it at times, make excuse, I'm busy. Oh man, I don't know what's going to happen, inflation. And I'll make excuses. And then God keeps, how about you do this? How about you do this? And finally I'm like, okay, God, fine, I'll do it. So are you allowing God to break your heart? And when your heart is broken, do you do something about it? And all of God's children said, Amen.